Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Voices to End Hunger podcast in 2026. The year is already shaping up to be consequential for both domestic and global food and nutrition security. Globally, famine is threatening millions of people, and conflict, climate, and continuing political and economic uncertainty are driving hunger and malnutrition in many regions and countries. In the United States, SNAP continues to be in the spotlight, and those who rely on food assistance find themselves, their families, and their lives under a microscope. Finally, midterm elections are just around the corner this November, offering a potential inflection point for how the U.S. government approaches food security issues. Today, I speak with Eric Mitchell, president of the Alliance to End Hunger. We discuss the current state of hunger, food security policy, and what we should expect in the year to come. Eric, thank you for joining the Voices to End Hunger podcast once again.
Thank you for having me here. Happy 2026.
Happy New Year. Since we're starting at the beginning of a new year with our podcast, let's start today's conversation by setting the stage for our listeners. The new year brings with it continuing developments on both domestic and global food security. Let's start globally. What does the food security landscape look like around the world?
Well, when we look at food insecurity from a global perspective, it's increasingly complex. You see that hunger is driven by a number of factors, across the world. You have different conflicts that are still happening around the world, whether you're looking at Gaza, Ukraine, the Sahel. Now we're going to see what the situation is going to be with the impact of Venezuela and other parts of the world. But also hunger is deeply impacted by, other crises as well. When you talk about climate, drastic food shortages as a result to droughts, massive floods in certain regions throughout the year. Those are the things that you can't predict. So all these are impacting, communities globally, some of the most vulnerable communities, farmers, ranchers, what have you. These are the things that are impacting the ability to be able to, families to be able to put food on the table. Look, families have less resilience when prices are spiking and harvests fail. World Food Program and other partners are being forced to make heartbreaking choices because funding isn't keeping up with the need. I think what really concerns me the most, I would say, is also that what we don't want to do is normalize crisis level hunger. With all these emergencies that are happening across the globe, it starts to become, I guess, business as usual. And, you're having governments right now who are moving away from investing in humanitarian assistance, development assistance, all the different things that will help to address hunger crises all across the globe. And so one of the things that we would want is for us to remember that this should not be business as usual. We need to continue to invest, make the right investments in food security programs to basically ensure that we're able to move in a positive trajectory as it relates to food insecurity and hunger.
And as we were reminded in our last podcast by David Beckman, we have made as a world community tremendous progress. We're starting to see reversal of that given choices that governments are making, but we know how to solve these issues. And you're right, it's about making the right investments in the right places. Thank you for reminding us of that.
Yeah, I would say it's that you're right. These are policy choices that we're making, and with the right policies, which is what we saw, a decade or so ago. With the right policies, you actually can address food insecurity, even in these uncertain times of climate change, of conflict, other different things that are happening across the globe. With the right infrastructure, with the right resources, what will end up happening is then you can focus on those extreme cases because this infrastructure and resource and stability in other parts of the regions in the world is more efficient. And so then you can hone in on some of those more extreme cases and address those more extreme cases versus what you're seeing right now, where you're seeing humanitarian crises pretty much in every region of the world.
Let's turn to the US. Domestically, I know that we're facing a continuation of scrutiny related to the federal nutrition programs, especially SNAP. At the same time, we're also confronted with uncertainty around what the state of hunger looks like in the US. In December, late December, USDA released the latest food security report. We were hoping to see it earlier in the year, but we're happy to see it in December. It's probably going to be the last food security report of this administration. But when this annual report came out at the end of December, just 2 weeks ago, we saw that high rates of hunger in the US continue, particularly compared to the pandemic. After the pandemic, after those interventions related to the pandemic around food security were ended, we started to see spikes in hunger. And unfortunately, that trend continued in 2024. So we know that we're still seeing high rates of food insecurity in the US. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening here at home?
Well, you mentioned the food security report that came out. I guess better late than never. But what it does show is that hunger here is still persistent. There are 48 million Americans who are still trying to figure out how to put food on the table. And so, just like around the world, we have our own food crises here in the United States. Often those food crises are a result of higher housing costs, utility costs, obviously medical expenses, and just overall wages. Um, I always see food insecurity as an affordability issue. When people are able to afford food, when food is available and accessible to them, then they're able to make those choices about resources they need for themselves and their family. The one thing that we do know that we have here in this country that many other nations do not have is that we have a safety net program that's serially focused on making sure that people have enough resources to put food on the table. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, is a key driver, making sure that families are fed. And we saw this a few months ago when there was the government shutdown and people were worried about their SNAP benefits being taken away. You saw the immediate reaction, the immediate concern that you had across communities, because people were worried that they wouldn't be able to afford food. Food banks, their numbers were swelling. Lines were getting longer. Grocery stores were concerned about people doing crisis shopping, if you will, and there would no longer be enough food on the shelves. And all this was a result of the threat of a major food security program being taken away. This lets you know that hunger is not a partisan issue. Hunger is not a black, white issue, poor, rich issue. Hunger is an issue that impacts all of us. I often tell people, you all guys often hear me say that there are people in your church, people at your schools, coworkers, family members who at some point in their life had to wake up trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet. We all know someone who's had to make those tough decisions between rent, between heating and buying their own food. And so what's going to be important for us as we look at this year is reminding folks about, this critical issue. Remember where we were in October, November of 2025 when people were trying to figure out, what they're going to do to be able to feed themselves. And remember what policies were in place to create those crises. What we're going to see coming down the road this year is because of the major policy change that happened over the summer as a result of HR 1 or the One Big Beautiful Bill or the One Big Ugly Bill, however you want to call it, is that this level of uncertainty is going to be impacting, people at the local, state and local level. And many states are going to have to figure out how they're going to close those gaps in order to ensure that their most vulnerable citizens and residents are able to put food on the table. And so, this is something that's going to continue. This is something that we need to continue to keep pressing forward. And this is something that we're going to continue to remind our policymakers of the decisions that they've been making to help to address these problems.
Thank you. You often refer to 2025 as the year of the pivot. I'm curious as to how you're thinking about 2026. I know you just mentioned we have a lot of things that are coming at us that were passed in 2025, shuttering of USAID, the HR 1 and all of the impacts to the SNAP program and other federal nutrition programs. So how are you thinking of 2026?
2025, the reason why I call 2025 the year of the pivot is because with all the level of uncertainty, all the level of major drastic changes, like you just mentioned, Minerva, shutdowns of federal agencies, the rollback of federal benefits, and government shutdowns, and everything in between. Literally from January through December, we all had to react and respond to those drastic changes. Um, so where I saw 2025 as the year of the pivot, I see this year as the year of resilience and alignment. I think it's going to be important for us to be able to continue to press forward because the craziness is still going to be there. The level of uncertainty is still going to be there. And the level of chaos is still going to be there coming from some of our policy makers and elected leaders. Plus, you have an election year. So there's going to be a lot of distractions that are going to be put in front of us that they're going to want us to focus on and want us to pay attention to and respond to. But what we need to do is make sure that we are staying highly focused on what our end goal as an anti-hunger organization and anti-hunger community to say, okay, what are these policies have to do to address food insecurity in the United States and food insecurity and malnutrition globally? And be resilient and keep pressing forward, almost like having tunnel vision in the sense of reminding elected officials that regardless of all these outside distractions, concerns, and smoke, that there's still key policies that we need to make in regards to federal funding, in regards to policies related to access, in regards to affordability, and making sure that healthier food options are available and affordable and that our federal nutrition programs are aligned with those decisions. We're going to have to stay resilient in making sure that we do not be distracted with all the other different elements that are in front of us. And also say alignment because it's going to be important for us to, as a community, to still sing under one song sheet. Um, when you go to see the choir and you have the altos, sopranos, the tenors, all the different groups. I'm not a singer, so I may be wrong in all the different ways of singing. But for those of us who hear choirs, they all may have different talents, but when they're all coming together, it's this harmonious sound, right? And so as groups with all these special talents and interests and priorities, it's going to be important for us to really sing under one song sheet as it relates to hunger, as it relates to nutrition, and as it relates to making sure that people are able to be properly fed. And so the Alliance in Hunger, our whole mission is to break down silos. And I think it'll be more important than ever to ensure that we are breaking down silos to make people understand that my issue is your issue is my issue, and that together, if we able to solve hunger, then that also knocks down walls for some of those other key things as it relates to poverty, as it relates to housing, as it relates to climate, as it relates to healthcare, and all these other key aspects that are kind of like the driving causes of food insecurity.
So, Eric, I totally agree with you when you talk about alignment and resilience. And part of that alignment is the work we do at the Alliance and Hunger with our partners, with our members. What do you think about when it comes to working with our members and partners in 2026?
Yeah, I'd see this as an opportunity, and I'm really excited about the opportunity for cross collaboration, because, like I said before, yeah, I think that this is one of those issues that cuts across ideology, it cuts across geography, it cuts across sectors. As the Alliance, we are a coalition of over 100 plus national organizations, ranging from food companies to technology companies to nonprofits who are faith-based driven across a number of faiths and denominations to universities, what have you. And I think through that, people understand that in some of these groups, food insecurity and nutrition isn't like their primary focus. They're not anti-hunger organizations, but they recognize that this is something that impacts their customer base. This is something that impacts the communities, constituencies that they're serving. We've had a very good conversation with groups around new partnerships where as it relates to making sure that farmers have the resources they need to address climate shocks and what have you. These are the conversations that we've been having and that we're open to continuing to have this year. What we've learned over the last few years, I would say probably even since COVID, what we've learned is that there is a renewed appetite, pun intended, for collaboration across all these different sectors. It's no longer like seeing these as a competition, but more as potential partnerships. So I think, the moments that we've seen over the last few months has opened more doors for groups to be interested in, okay, how do we as an organization get engaged on these issues around hunger, food security, and nutrition? And they look at the Alliance as a great partner to start that journey with. I'm also excited about deeper relationship with our hunger-free community partners. Throughout this last, I would say 12 to 18 months, we've done 4 regional convenings in all parts of the country where we had a chance to speak directly with our hunger free community partners to talk about food insecurity at the local level and also come up with solutions that they could take forward at the regional level. We are working with a partner right now to do something in a state where we're going to a statewide convening earlier this year, and where we're going to bring hunger free community partners to address hunger in the state. And so we are really looking forward to some of the work that we're going to continue to do with those partners. Our hunger free partners have even become part of our overall federal advocacy. We've gotten them engaged in our advocacy with federal officials, oftentimes, inviting them to meet with their senators, representatives, as well as do advocacy at the local level with their elected officials. And so, we are becoming a true voice with those partners. We've been able to work with them with grant funding to strengthen their capacity and their ability to do this work on the ground in their communities. And I'm looking forward to continuing and to even grow that level of engagement in 2026.
Great. I'd love to dig into something you said a little earlier about this is an election year. 2026 is going to be hugely important for the midterm elections with every member of the House and a third of the Senate up for grabs. How should we be leveraging this time to promote food security as an election priority?
One thing I would say is the benefit of what we saw over the last, I would say, as a result of the government shutdown debate. Although that was over ACA benefits and healthcare costs, what was an undercurrent of that issue was food security, mainly because people understood for the first time, I would say, in a while, how these policies are impacting the everyday lives of me being able to provide the one basic need, which is to be able to buy food for myself and my family. In the midterm election, with all things local, we always say the term, politics is local. That is the thing that I think we can continue to keep driving as a key issue during the election. Coming up in 2026 and even starting in 2027, you'll start seeing some of the policies from the changes to SNAP being implemented in states, whether it's increasing workforce requirements or whether it's putting more of the burden on states because of their error rates, et cetera. And now states are going to have to figure out, do I put more money in the school system? Do I put more money on roads? Or do I put more money in covering the gap in the SNAP program? What elected officials aren't realizing is that people are going to be responsive to these needs, and oftentimes they're going to find someone to blame. They're either going to blame their governors, their state reps, or the federal policymakers who made these decisions. We're not an election-based organization, but one of the things we want to continue to keep reminding people is that this is an issue as you're trying to make those key decisions on the ballot. These are the issues that we're going to continue to keep pressing to make sure that people understand how these policies are impacting them. We are going to make sure that throughout this election, you understand whether or not your policymaker helped to make your life better or worse. And that's just in the domestic perspective. There's also the global consequences as well. When we are talking about the rolling back and pulling back of the UN, the rolling back and pulling back of food assistance, but yet you're still seeing major crises happening around the world and less food becoming unavailable. What decisions have been made that help to either improve that situation or make that situation worse? It's our goal to make sure that we are working to improve our food security programs. We want to work with the administration and others to make it more efficient. We don't care whether it's owned by the State Department or USDA, but what we do care about is that this program, when I talk about programs like Food for Peace and McGovern Dole and other key programs, are strong enough and efficient enough to take care of those across the globe who are in their most vulnerable state of their life. And so, from an anti-hunger perspective, those are other key issues and key things we want to make sure people are reminded as they're looking at how they want to allocate federal resources and prioritize federal resources over other key resources that may be talked about throughout this time.
Thanks. What other challenges or opportunities do you see coming down the pike that may affect our work at the Alliance to End Hunger and that of the broader food and nutrition community in the U.S. or abroad this year?
Well, I touched on it just now. I talked globally, and I talked a little bit about potential change of where our global food security programs live. I know there are some concerns around the effectiveness if these programs are moved from one agency to the next. But I see this as an opportunity of building new champions. Obviously, we've always talked about our global food security programs and the role that U.S. agriculture plays and U.S. farmers play to ensure that people around the world are fed. I think that this is a key way to help continue to strengthen and build those partnerships from an advocacy perspective. And so I welcome us to be able to have those conversations. Again, it has to be more than just about procuring U.S. commodities, but it also has to be about making sure that those commodities are at the end of the day given to the places where they're needed the most. And so we want to make sure that this is a way to continue that priority. In the US, um, again, I think more and more groups, more and more companies, more and more individuals are understanding that hunger is not a day issue. In other words, this is a concern for those people over there, and you're in this situation because of something you've done. Oftentimes, there's a narrative wanting to blame low-income Americans or people who are trying to figure out how to make ends meet. No one wants to be poor. No one wants to struggle, and oftentimes, many people are working multiple jobs to figure out how they're going to, address their basic needs. And so, I see this as an opportunity of building and expanding our coalition and making this advocacy even stronger, so that way few years down the road, they don't see this as a weak coalition that they want to just weaken our these federal nutrition programs. If we are seeing opportunities, for example, in improving the WIC program, modernizing that, we also see opportunity to expand the SNAP coalition, improving online SNAP, making sure that hot and prepared meals are available and accessible through SNAP benefits, expanding programs like GusSNP, expanding programs like Double Your Snap Bucks. We're going to use this as opportunity to talk about how these issues help to address nutrition and food security in the U.S. Another key thing, last week the administration, just put forward their dietary guidelines, and as part of their MAHA movement, making America healthy again movement. I think no one disagrees that we want Americans to be able to make healthier choices when it comes to food. But the one thing that is not discussed that I think we have an opportunity to lift up is the affordability and availability aspect of that. And there's a key piece that our federal nutrition programs play in making to ensure that, okay, if you want families to make healthier choices in the food they purchase, what can we do to help incentivize that ability? And part of that is making sure that our federal nutrition programs are robust and strong enough, and those benefits are substantial enough so that people can make those healthier choices, and that those healthier choices, healthier options are available in those communities. Um, and so those are things I think I'm excited about, working on with you and others here in 2026.
Okay. So, anything else, Eric, that maybe you didn't get to say that you want to reflect on before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to just close out with just a thank you. We completed our first year of doing these podcasts. We've had 14 episodes. Minerva has been a rock star. And, I just want to thank you and the production team, Nate. You're out there for the hard work in pulling this together. I'm really excited about the potential guests that we have lined up for this year. We're looking at having some elected officials. We also, we're going to have some key authors here, but as well as, we're going to be asking you all as our community, to be guests as well. And if there's things and topics that you think you'd want us to discuss, we want to hear from you and our listeners about what you would like for us to dive into this year. So we are excited about year 2 of the Voices to End Hunger podcast, and we just want you to continue to listen in, but also spread the word.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to echo your excitement. I'm excited. We've wrapped up the first year of the podcast and just gotten such great feedback from folks. And there's still so many great interviews to come with so many of our partners who are doing fantastic work. I think it's one of the privileges to be in this position is just to be able to communicate with all of the amazing, dedicated, brilliant partners that we know are working to end poverty and hunger across the U.S. and around the world. And it's just a privilege to bring their stories. So, yes, looking forward to many more podcasts in the year to come. Thank you, Eric, for joining the first episode of Voices to End Hunger podcast in 2026. And we're off to a great start. Really appreciate you and your leadership at the Alliance to End Hunger.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
That was our own Eric Mitchell of the Alliance to End Hunger. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Voices to End Hunger podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at podcast@alliancetoendhunger.org. And don't forget to subscribe and share. Today's episode was produced and edited by Nate McGrath. I'm Minerva Delgado. See you next time.